Greetings, everyone. Hope you're getting a chance to get settled in, enjoy your lunch. Really honored to be on the stage. So my name is Jay Olu-Baiwu. I am the Urban Agriculture and Food Systems Director for the City of Atlanta. I'm in the Mayor's Office of Sustainability and Resilience. Also, what brings me to this forum is that I am a board member. I've been on the board for about 3+ years. So it's an honor to be in the space with all of you as colleagues, compadres, agitators, and other wonderful people as well. You know, one of the things that's really special about this particular part of the forum is that we're moving into an area where we're going to center those whose calls to action are from the movements that represent the most impacted. So about myself too, again, I am Nigerian, British American. I grew up in the Southeast in Athens, Georgia, a father of a 15-year-old. If you don't know, I'm a black man as well. And it's just been, you know, a pretty interesting and awesome evolving journey as I've come into this space. So I started off in restaurant and hospitality work. Then I was managing farmers markets. I was creating products, farmed for about 2.5 years, a Truly Living Well Center for Natural Urban Agriculture, entrepreneurship funder, and now City of Atlanta. So it's been a great journey. So again, this next panel and of course the keynote speaker are really dear to me and the topic at hand. When they asked me to introduce Baba Malik, you know what I said, right? I was like, I know why you asked me to do it. It's because I've got gray in my beard and I have locks like Baba Malik. Some of y'all will get that later. But no, truly, I'm really honored to be here. Baba Malik is an amazing person. He is a father, grandfather, home farmer, guitarist, songwriter, archivist, historian. Baba Malik is also a Pan-Africanist, and he's very proud of that and has been consistent for many decades. Malik Yakini is co-founder of the Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network, also known as DBCFSN. He served as its executive director from 2010 to 2024. He provided vision and leadership to DBCFSN's programs and initiatives, including the Detroit Policy Council, the 7-acre D-Town Farm, the Detroit Food Commons, which is a 31,000 square foot, 2-story building in Detroit's North End that houses the Black-led community-owned Detroit People's Food Co-op. Right on, yeah, definitely can clap for that. The 4 shared-use Kujichagulia kitchens. These are shared kitchens that community members are able to create their products, you know, do catering, things of that nature. So that's also housed in the same space. The Mama Imani Humphrey Banquet Hall, and then also DBCFSN's offices. Even before that, you know, Baba Malik was also a 20-year executive director at the Nsoroma K-12 Institute. So this is a Pan-African school, an African-centered school that was in Detroit, and Baba Malik was a key leader and founder of that and was the executive director for 20 years. I think when we think about that as an African-centered school, it's also applicable when we think about where we are in New Mexico and when we think about the indigenous and throughout this whole country, not just in New Mexico, but just even in the space that we are, having that pride and those kind of institutions that center the culture that people are in. So culturally relevant, we say, right? He serves as a board member of the co-op. He's a co-founder and former leadership team member of the National Black Food and Justice Alliance. Got some members of those in here, I know, as the Alliance. Baba Malik views his work as part of the larger movement for building power and self-determination for African people and justice for humanity in general. He is adamantly opposed to the systems of white supremacy, capitalism, and patriarchy. He has spoken at dozens of universities, community organizations, not just in the US and also international. This brother has done work internationally in many, many places. I'm not gonna try to go down the list of all of that. He has an intense interest in contributing to the development of an international food sovereignty movement that embraces and centers the cultures, foodways, and wisdoms of Black communities in the Americas, the Caribbean, and Africa. He's currently reflecting, researching, writing, contemplating next steps. And for me, he is an elder, he is a mentor, and I'm extremely honored to be here to introduce him. So please, beat on your tables, round of applause, whoop it up, shake your hand, give a warm welcome to Baba Malik Yakini.
Good afternoon. That was the greatest intro ever. So for those of you who might be from Detroit or who have been from Detroit, I have to greet you in the official Detroit greeting. What up, doe? Typically when I speak, I don't read from documents, but I found that when I have a limited amount of time, I can be more disciplined and focused if I read. So I'm going to try to be not so extemporaneous today. But I'll start, as I always do, by giving thanks to the Creator, however you might conceptualize the force that creates order in the universe and that allows us to take a breath each day and connects us to the rest of life. And also, I always have to honor my ancestors, those that are shared by African people generally, but also particularly those who are in my bloodline, who I continue to draw inspiration from. So Jay Olu mentioned that I was the executive director of Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network, and I stepped down from that position a year ago. And so I'm kind of in a transition, and sometimes when people ask me, what do you do? I don't know how to answer that now because I'm kind of transitioning from what I did to whatever comes next. And I'm okay with that. I'm not pressuring myself to figure out what comes next. I want to give a big up to my comrades in the Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network, my comrades in the National Black Food and Justice Alliance. I want to call out particularly my sister Dara Cooper, co-founder and our first executive director, and just a powerhouse. You want to stay on her right side, by the way, funders, just let me let you know. Let me let you know now. But I also want to give a shout out to EFOD. There's some EFOD folks here. And I want to give a shout out to an organization that I just found out about since I've been at this conference, Liberating Investments in the Food and Farm Ecosystem, the Life Collaborative. So many of the ideas I'm going to share with you today and many of the practices of food justice have been developed by those organizations. And so this is not an individual work, and my ideas are not individual ideas. They've been shaped collectively. So I was asked to speak on this topic, what time is it on the clock of the world? And many of you know that Jimmy Boggs and Grace Lee Boggs often open community meetings with that question. I feel particularly honored to speak to this question because growing up in Detroit, Jimmy and Grace Boggs helped to forge the climate out of which my political identity grew. Jimmy Boggs, if you are not aware, was born in Alabama in 1919. He migrated to Detroit in 1939, where he became an auto worker. He worked in the Chrysler plant for several decades, and he became a revolutionary thinker and activist who was respected throughout the world. He started as a Marxist, kind of evolved into a Trotskyite, and then evolved even further. He and Grace evolved beyond the constrictions, perhaps, of ideology, and began to focus on how we grow our humanity. Jimmy became an ancestor in 1993, but his impact was profound. One of the books he wrote that is often quoted is the American Revolution, Pages from a Negro Worker's Notebook. Grace Lee Boggs, was a Chinese-American activist born in New York City in 1915. She lived to the ripe age of 100, passing in 2015 in the city of Detroit. because she lived for more than 2 decades after Jimmy Boggs died, she's much more well-known among younger activists than her late husband, Jimmy. So, again, what time is it on the clock of the world is the question that they would often ask when they began community discussions and meetings. That question implies that humanity is evolving and simultaneously shaping and changing the physical, economic, political, and cultural world that we live in. It implies that there are periods, stages, or eras in human development which each have their own characteristics, possibilities, and limitations. For example, the golden age of the Moors from 711 until 1492 brought philosophy, science, mathematics, and various technologies to the Iberian Peninsula and eventually Western Europe, the rest of Western Europe. This resulted in both an age of enlightenment and also in the wider exploration of the world. The age of European imperialism from the 1400s to, I would suggest, the present, because it's still not over, and perhaps I should say European and American imperialism. Saw much of the planet and its people being colonized and their resources stolen by people from England, Spain, France, Portugal, Belgium, the Netherlands, Denmark, Italy, and Germany. The Industrial Revolution, which is generally agreed to have occurred between 1760 and 1840, beginning in the mills of the United Kingdom, fueled by cotton grown by enslaved Africans from the south of the United States, forever changed production and human labor. The anti-colonial era, which began with the Haitian Revolution in 1703 and reached a high point in the 1950s and 1960s, with many African and Asian nations receiving nominal independence. The civil rights and black power movements were at their height in the mid-1950s through the early 1970s. These movements redefined many of the institutions, laws, policies, and practices in American society. The musicians of the accompanying black arts movement challenged and transformed the melodic, rhythmic, and harmonic sensibilities of Western music. The movement's writers challenged the colonizers' monopoly on meaning, turned words and phrases on their heads, and in the process enriched the language. The information and technology age, which began in 1947 with the invention of the transistor, has redefined work, education, transportation, finance, the food system, and every other aspect of life in much of the world. I forgot I'm supposed to be showing these slides. So that's Jimmy Boggs in the upper corner. That's a picture of Grace and I on a panel that we served on together, and I was very fortunate to have a relationship with Grace that was one of mutual respect, although we didn't always totally agree, but we respected each other. So to know what time it is on the clock of the world, we have to have a sense of history. And all of those eras that I just laid out for you are examples of how we need to have this sense of how human development flows through history. Secondly, we must have a profound understanding that the United States is not the world. While the United States has tremendous power and influence in the world, there are more than 200 other countries on the planet which each have aspirations and impact the course of human affairs. Power relationships are changing on a global basis. The efforts of BRICS will change global financial relationships. The efforts of the AES, the Alliance of Sahel States, is redefining Africa's relationship to Western powers and inspiring other African leaders to reject continued European and American domination and exploitation. The question remains, what time is it on the clock of the world? What of this moment of climate chaos from profit-driven human activity? This moment where more than half of the global population is living under authoritarian regimes, where nonprofits are scrubbing their websites and literature for any language that might suggest that they work for racial justice, equity, or inclusion, What of this moment where a convicted felon occupies the White House, issuing executive orders that undo decades of progress? What of this moment where farmers and food justice advocates receive terse letters telling them that the funding that they have contracted for and built budgets around has been revoked? What of this moment where police are militarized, emboldened, and empowered to crush dissent and to brutalize and murder black and brown men, women, and children? What of this moment where a billionaire is given free access to the personal data of millions of citizens? What of this moment where patriarchy is reasserting itself and attacks on gays and trans people have become government policy? What of this moment where white South African so-called refugees are welcomed into the United States while those who are fleeing persecution or death from Haiti, Sudan, the Congo, and Venezuela are prohibited from entering? What of this moment where Palestinians are bombed into the Stone Age? What of this moment where aid to mothers and children is not certain? School lunches could be on the chopping block, and even Social Security is a potential target. We are witnessing an attempt to recenter whiteness. Eurocentric cultural and historical lenses are being uplifted and normalized. The history and culture of those whose ancestors are not from Western Europe are under attack. Here's the irony. By suppressing the cultural values, knowledge, and wisdom of the oppressed, the oppressor also denies himself access to the rich, deep well of possibilities alive in the experiences of the oppressed. They begin to believe their own hype. They become arrogant and convinced that their limited knowledge of the world is sufficient. The reality is that the solutions to many of the problems that make Western systems of manufacturing, energy, food, justice, politics, economics, education, and healthcare unsustainable lie in the values and wisdom of traditional African and other indigenous cultures. The old order is trying to reassert itself in a world where power relationships are swiftly evolving, while in the long run, it's an exercise in futility. In the short term, they're extremely dangerous. Given all of that, I would suggest that the answer to the question of what time is it on the clock of the world is, it's 5 minutes to fascism. I was discussing this with Navina yesterday. She said, "You sure it's 5?" And I said, "Well, actually, I wrote this last week." She said, so she told me to make sure I let you all know I wrote this last week, because we may be actually like 2 minutes from fascism at this point, given what has occurred in Los Angeles this past week with the deployment of the U.S. Marines against people exercising their right to dissent. So the next question is, therefore, what? Once we know what time it is, what do we do? Frantz Fanon said, "Every generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its historical mission, fulfill it, or betray it." This is instructive in these times. The Black Panther Party kind of condensed that wisdom into a very short slogan, and they said, "Seize the time." In my last conversation with Grace Lee Boggs, she was laying in the bed and she whispered into my ear, "We have to think faster if we're going to keep up." So what are our choices? We can throw up the white flag and say, "You win, fascist, global, capitalist, white supremacist." No? Hell no. No, that's not an option. That's not an option. At least for most of us, it's not an option. Clearly, it's an option for some people. Number 2, we can gradually patch holes in the dam and hope and pray that in 4 years everything will get better. Or we can become fierce fighters, organizers, and funders for justice, power, and self-determination. who refuse to be thwarted by any person, group, or policy. Our movement has always had a two-pillared approach, one that I call resistance and one that I call building. That is that on one hand, we have the responsibility to fight against those policies and practices that shorten our quality and quantity of life. For example, when the police kill a black person, we should be in the streets expressing our indignation and applying pressure for justice. By the way, for me, this is not just a theoretical exercise. About 2 weeks ago, one of the former students at the school that Jay Olu talked about that I ran, who I maintained a relationship with over the years, was shot and killed by the Michigan State Police after a traffic stop on the freeway. There's no way a traffic stop should end a person's life. So I'm kind of putting this out there. I can't talk much about it now because we're still in the initial stages of gathering information, but I do want to begin to make people aware that this has occurred, and you'll hear more about that in the coming weeks. We should oppose food policies that center the power to define the food system in the hands of market forces. However, and let me just deviate for a minute and say that many times in the 70s as an activist, we would be at rallies and meetings and we say, down with racism, down with imperialism, down with capitalism. And then people say, well, what do you want? We hadn't thought that through too clearly. So as our movement has matured, I think we know that it's equally as important to build the just, equitable, sustainable world that we want to see, not just to call out and oppose those things that we're against. Both approaches, resistance and building, are necessary. I would suggest with limited capacity and dwindling resources, we need to reassess how much time, energy, and resources we allocate to each of those. We should reassess what policy wins are possible during the current time period, and how much energy should be put into achieving them. In challenging times, where we seemingly have lost control or influence of so many external factors, we must turn inward and ask ourselves, what do we have control of? What factors are working in our favor, and who are our friends? It's critical that we stay focused and centered and not allow ourselves to be thrown off balance by every new executive order or statement from the White House. Acknowledging that reality that we are facing without giving in to despair. Some of the folks in the room today are frontline fighters, and some of the folks are funders, and some are at the intersection of funding and frontline fighting. So I have a special message to the frontline activists in the House today. Some of the things that I think we need to do to move through this time period is to develop deeper and broader relationships, to deepen our collaborations, to reduce and have more targeted consumption, to increase cooperative buying, to practice family, personal, and community self-care routines, to develop increased mutual aid capabilities, deepen our spiritual practices, deepen our humanity, lean into our values, identify and celebrate victories, identify opportunities to engage more deeply with community, push harder and become more fearless. While we're doing all this, we have to also maintain the moral high ground. We have to develop and maintain international connections with values-aligned people. We have to model new, which are really old ways of being in relationship with each other and with the earth. And then finally, we have to find points of joy in our lives and embrace them and carry them with us in difficult times. This message, the next message, is to funders. Can I see just by a show of hands who the funders are in the House? Thank you, thank you, thank you. We need philanthropy to continue to uphold, uplift, and adequately fund efforts to create racial justice. Honor the language in your mission statements around racial justice and equity, and don't fold to unconstitutional assaults on our freedoms to pursue justice. That's a direct quote from Life, by the way, so I just want to credit where that came from. We need anti-racist. Being an anti-racist means that you are not only working to dismantle institutional white supremacy, but that you are also engaging in the more difficult work of dismantling the internalized white supremacy within yourself. We need philanthropy to increase long-term funding to grassroots-led organizations that are really shifting power, not merely addressing symptoms. We need philanthropy to transfer resources into frontline food justice movements, going beyond the 5% for a sustained period of time, and to continue finding entry points to shift power and resources into community-governed hands. We need more democratic decision-making about funding. We need funders to give large pots of funding to community-governed funding vehicles who decide who gets it and for what purposes. We need less complicated reporting requirements. We need philanthropy to be accountable. Genuine accountability means listening to movement leaders, following our lead, and stepping back so frontline communities can steer our own resources, decisions, and solutions that shape our collective future. Again, I want to big up the Life Collaborative for that. We need justice, not charity. Return to frontline communities of color what was stolen. The wealth that built philanthropy was extracted from our lands, labor, and lives and continues to be hoarded in extractive industries. It's time to return it fully, directly, and without conditions. And finally, we want to encourage funders to think beyond plugging the gaps that have been created by the current government cuts. Yes, plug those gaps, but think beyond this current crisis, because the work that we have to do is long-term and requires long-term, robust funding. We should reassess the millions spent on conferences aimed at fostering a more just and sustainable food system in society. Finally, I'd like to close with a poem that was written 3 days ago by a friend of mine, Adrienne Marie Brown, who is a sometimes Detroiter. And she calls this poem June 9th, and it was written in response to what we saw in the streets of LA. We bring us wherever we go. We find our power. We use it as a shield for all of us. We recognize every breath as a front line and every colonized border as a lie. We learn again to see all people, as equal. We care for ourselves. We care for each other. We honor each tactic of freedom. We begin by listening. We listen to know each other. We let go. We let our fear fuel our compassion. We let our love guide every action. We fight for the land and the people. We risk seizing the moment. We risk heaven on earth. We risk saving each other. We risk saving ourselves. Thank you.